This podcast talks candidly and openly about issues of male sexual violence. A full list of topics can be found in the episode description. Unfortunately, during this recording, we experienced a sound issue that we weren't aware of until the recording was over. However, the content of the conversation makes it well worth sticking with us throughout. Hello and welcome to Beyond the Silence, the official podcast of We're Survivors. My name is George. I'll be your host for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you also for joining us, Riz and Nisaa, my two guests for today. Before we get into an interview with them, let's talk about what this place is really for. Beyond the Silence is about creating a safe space for male survivors of sexual assault. We talk about difficult topics here. We share things that are relevant to our community, but it's also a chance for you to learn things about our service, the kind of spaces that we provide for you, as well as get a wider view at changes and developments in the greater sphere of this particular sector, the things that affect survivors every single day. After an interview with Riz and Nisaa, we'll be moving to this week's news stories, looking at relevant articles, things that affect survivors. Specifically, we're actually going to focus on particular areas of barriers to the service for people from certain communities, and I'll be really excited to engage with that with Riz and Nisaa because it very specifically relates to the kind of work that they've done here and outside it in the community. Later, we're going to take a shine on the activity spotlight. That's going to focus on one of our very specific initiatives for survivors. Sometimes we talk about the spaces we create here. Today, it's going to be a little bit different. Then finally is the letters segment. That is a chance for you to write in, have your voice be heard, ask your questions, share your stories. I recommend that you stick around till the very end for that. But if you would like to jump through the episode, there are time codes available. So, with that in mind, please grab yourself a cup of coffee, sit somewhere comfortable, and let's begin. Riz and Nisaa, pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you, George, for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you for having us, George.
No, absolutely. Well, so you're both part of the therapy team. That's very much your background. For those who might not be familiar with the kind of therapy that we offer here at We're Survivors, would you mind just giving me a bit of information about what people would expect from this part of our service?
Yeah, definitely. So we offer one-to-one therapy.
Yeah.
We offer two different programs of therapy. We have a 12-week program and a 20-week program. I am at the moment the therapy service manager for the therapy team. So I have a smaller caseload, but I began as a therapist here, worked my way up to senior, and now I am the manager for the therapy team. So maybe Riz will have a bit more to say around the programs that we offer and what they mean.
Yeah, we have, Nisaa said we have two programs, one called the Healing Steps.
Yeah.
That's more about psychoeducation, so we're kind of educating the clients and also looking at providing them with coping mechanisms, looking at new mechanisms. So we probably explore their current existing ones and see how we can better incorporate.
So workshop them, help. It's focusing around stability, primarily.
Yeah, exactly. So stabilising the clients, etc. And then we have a 20-week program called Breaking the Silence. And again, there will be some stabilisation work in there as well. We provide an environment, hopefully a safe environment where the client feels comfortable talking about their trauma, moving towards a stage where they feel comfortable kind of going back into society, normalising the experience rather than the trauma itself. So kind of guiding them through that.
Okay.
Just to add to that as well, we offer one-to-one support for family members of survivors. So those survivors accessing our service, if their family member is impacted by obviously what's gone on, and if they're aware, we also offer the one-to-one therapy.
I think it's fantastic. No, it's such an important part of our remit. If you want to support survivors, you need to support the most important people in their lives, and that is their safety net at home or wherever it may be.
Absolutely.
So this is a very specialised field of work. What drew you both into working in this environment in particular?
I think for me, it was just kind of my own life experience growing up in a community where we don't really talk about these things, and sort of seeing it happen within the community so much and not having support. When I found out about Survivors Manchester, well, it was Survivors Manchester at the time.
Yeah, of course.
I was in university, so I just used to follow everything that they used to do because it was a movement that didn't really get much attention because it was male survivors.
It's quite niche,
Yeah, the focus was always on females. So when the opportunity came and there was a job opportunity available, I just jumped at it because I wanted to be a part of this movement. It's a cause, like you said, that just doesn't get the attention that it needs. But I think we're growing, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, it feels like a really, really exciting time. It's very much been a spotlight on male survivorship at the moment. But though we've seen more people feel comfortable to talk about it in the media and share their experiences, I think there's so much to be said about the people who we haven't reached yet. When we look at our demographics, when we look at the data, who engages with our service, who is able to feel invited into certain aspects of it. So on the community side of things, the data in terms of, for example, like certain ethnic groups or certain religious groups, quite different to how we might see in therapy, where it's a one-on-one environment. I think the word community and the promise of a group space, I think, can definitely be intimidating and isolating. Riz, could you share with me some thoughts on some of the barriers that people might face in order to being able to engage in our community because of their background?
That's quite a big, complex question you're asking there. Obviously, there's quite a lot of I say history involved in it as well. If we go back to the 1950s, 60s, when our parents, grandparents came over, they left their support network, their families, their faith, their culture, and coming over here, they were, I suppose you could say they were removed from that network.
Yeah.
So also coming to the country, having to settle, they build their roots, establish themselves basically. So the focus was not on their mental well-being, just kind of being able to provide for their families.
Yeah.
And growing up, me personally as well, I'm first generation in my group, I was born here. So it's nurture. So seeing how you deal with certain aspects of your life, as an example. We don't talk about emotional stress or emotions or trauma, etc. We kind of so that legacy is still there, I would say, within the community. Also, there's religious barriers, I would say. So religious and cultural barriers. Religion is very embedded in Eastern religions, I would say, and we put a lot on our faith, and or the perception of not accessing mental health, because messages we get is it's a test from God.
Right.
It was God's will. This is meant to happen. Also, there's a phrase about being patient. So patience is a virtue. One's heard of that. So we're expected to just put up and shut up and put it away, and it will go away. But unfortunately, it never does.
Worried so easy. Yeah, so those are do you think those are quite unique barriers? Do they present in interesting ways? Of course, when you look at the stigma that surrounds male silence in general, there's a great underlying sort of thread throughout all kinds of cultures about perceptions of strength and about silence and what men shouldn't share. Is there something that you found in your own experience working with clients or just existing within your own communities about how these barriers play particularly into male survivorship?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like was mentioned around the history, I think as well we've had a sort of deep-rooted patriarchal views and values in our history, where men are supposed to be seen as strong, men are supposed to be seen as protectors and providers. They're not allowed to suffer. So I think that's definitely deeply rooted in a lot of the clients that I've supported and I've worked with, and they struggle to come out of those social norms that they've grown up hearing and believing that is life for them. So that's been a huge barrier, and also the focus, I think, has been mainly on females. So there's a lot of space for females to be able to access support, which there should be.
Yeah, of course.
But there also should be an equal amount for men. And I think when coming from a community where it's deeply rooted to be masculine and deeply rooted to be strong, I think that can be a real barrier and a real complex kind of view around accessing support, because they might feel like this isn't for me, this is just for women, and if I access these spaces I'm going to be seen as weak. So I think that there's a lot that's deeply rooted in a lot of the work that we do, and we see that playing out a lot of the time. But what we're noticing more and more is people are coming forward. When there's a space here, people do access the service from our community. It's just not as many as we'd like.
Yeah, I think when you look at something like a community and you can look at certain groups, so for example, the Jewish community or the Muslim community, you see very strong values that should, at a face level, help encourage people to be able to talk, regular weekly meetings, having community around there, having, inbuilt spiritual advisors sort of built in where you can have a one-on-one session. It's obviously it's not therapy, but a private conversation with someone about what you're struggling with. It seems at face value that there should be some great strengths there that should help people feel like they are able to talk more than someone who might be, disconnected from a religious background or outside of a diaspora. But it's interesting to see that that's not always the case, and sometimes it can actually quite feed into stigma. I think a piece of literature that I find myself quite compelling relating to when you look at societal values and you look at the embodiment of how much society supports someone would be the writing of Émile Durkheim, who's a French philosopher. And he focused on his book, helpfully titled Suicide, about the impact of suicide. And about it is a very simple illustration of if a society is treating someone well and isn't failing someone, the suicide rates are lower. And what he looked at was how in Catholic countries, he was of course from France, so we focus very much on that part of the world, but I think the lesson applies elsewhere. The suicide rates are lower because of what he read to be community values. But I think there's something to be said there about potentially people being missed or suicide being such a topic of stigma that it's not really discussed in such a way, and there might be deaths that aren't classed as suicide, and that's something that I think you found in your own research as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Just I think it was the World Health Organization, so you can sort of see how many deaths are recorded by suicide. And if you look on South Asian countries on the World Health Organization website, it's very low. It's extremely low, and it's kind of scary to see, because when you actually research and look into the reasons why, there's a lack of education around people dying by suicide. There's a lack of education around mental health support and people struggling. And there's also, I think you touched on it, that the family, the community, bringing shame on the family is a really big topic in our community. People don't reach out. People don't want to say they're suffering because they don't want their families to be seen in this kind of shameful way that is, always talked about. If you're struggling, you're bringing shame on the family. Like Riz mentioned, just pray, or you're not close to your religion. That's why you're suffering, and this is going to make us look bad. So I think when you actually look into the research, it's not low because these places are really happy and people aren't suffering from suicidal thoughts. The data is just not recorded because families won't admit that somebody within their family has died by suicide.
That's scarier, because if you're able to record it as a suicide, however painful it might be, it's a wake-up call. It shows people that needs aren't being met. But to brush it under the rug means that not only are people who've passed away under tragic circumstances not having the tragedy of their lives recorded and appreciated for what it was, but other people aren't sort of able to wake up and look at, kind of smell the coffee and see what's really going on. I think it must be very, very difficult. Certainly as well, when you look at the constant overlap between what counts as sort of a diasporic group or an ethnic group and what fits under the barrier of this is a religious circle, because there's so much overlap in certain communities. Having difficulties with a family member, having difficulties with a spiritual leader in the community, that can very easily spill out from what I've seen into sort of a wider situation where people can suddenly have this entire network kind of pulled away from them, feel very, very ostracized. Mm-hmm. What are some signs that people might be able to identify that someone may be being groomed or maybe more at risk, for example, of abuse within their community? Are there sort of things that we can look out for in order to sort of see behind what might be, for some people, quite a barrier or quite a different circumstance? How are we able to look through that and find out that someone might be more at risk?
I suppose you can look at the behavioural changes, so sudden behavioural changes in individuals, whether they're isolating themselves, a change in personality, are they withdrawn, angry outbursts maybe, something that's out of character for this person. Someone who's maybe struck up a friendship with an older person, and also being sensitive about how much time they're spending on their own. So obviously there'll be more to it than that, but just as an indication of what to look out for.
Yeah.
Again, just being aware of what's going on around, family members, and just giving them time, giving them that time and space to speak and share if you're, if they're in that moment wanting to be able to talk to you and you're distracted, or again, so some of those may be our own values of not wanting to listen because we may become uncomfortable having difficult conversations.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So I just wanted to also mention around, family members can also be groomed. So depending on who the groomer is, it can make it really difficult for the victim to be believed because the whole family's been groomed in that process.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, for example, if it's a leader within the community, they will, portray themselves as somebody that's really high of faith, really has a lot of wisdom, can support the family in so many ways. So when a victim wants to reach out, it firstly creates a layer of how can I say this about this person that my family look up to?
Yeah.
And then if they do reach out, that they might be, accused of lying, they might be accused of overreacting in some way. So I think that's a really interesting topic that we don't really talk about a lot. And I think, again, families don't want to admit to that because then they feel that they've, been involved in something that they shouldn't have, and it's a shame on the family. So that's a really big issue within, I think, not just our community, with a lot of communities.
Yeah.
When faith is then added, it just creates this whole new layer of disbelief.
It's kind of like another source of authority, right? Because that's what it really is. It's about power dynamics, in the same ways. You see high-profile celebrity abusers, and they've established their reputation, they've got their PR campaign around them, people associate them in certain ways. That with another layer of faith and having sort of authority that is often not questioned. And that has potentially been in a position generationally, a preacher might be, 80 years old. How many family members in a particular line may have been affected or may have had so many different experiences with this single person throughout a community or throughout a space? That's incredibly difficult. There's some other interesting challenges that, you think might be faced, not solely, of course, within the South Asian community or other communities, particularly relating perhaps to the role of female perpetrators and how that might be treated differently.
So female perpetrators, I think, is really quite a complex one again, because I think it's deep rooted within history within the community. So females are not seen as perpetrators. They're seen as, the victims the majority of the time. A lot of support services are focused on female survivors. So it's just that disbelief and the minimization of a male survivor accessing support because, they've had a female perpetrator in their life. I think as well that just society and the gender bias around men and women is really, really harmful to male survivors from female perpetrators.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think also communities would want to minimise the whole experience of the male survivor. And obviously, Nisa's touched on disbelief. Equally, I think there's an element of, and another law has changed recently, but a man can't abuse or whatever, or raped. That's now changed.
Yeah.
So again, it's that education, getting it out there that that this is a crime that's been acted, and it should be reported, and that's not filtered down.
Yeah.
And it's also not something that's within certain, South Asian countries. So, for example, I can talk about Pakistan because that's where my heritage is.
Sure.
In Pakistan, there's no law to protect a male that's been raped. So again, when the law doesn't say this is, what's going on and this is what we can support you with, and then how are they supposed to access support? How are they even supposed to believe what they've been through is abuse?
Yeah.
Which I think is a really, again, and a completely, it's just awful. It's really awful for male survivors that are victims of female perpetrators because they don't feel like they have a space to talk about it.
Yeah, I think there's certainly the difficulties of the same kind of sphere that protects a female perpetrator is also quite like an all-encompassing thing about if a woman feels like she's being put in a role as like a mother pushed away from an active influencer, then when, use is perpetrated, people aren't going to be looking in that direction. I think there's also a very real barrier as well when it comes to that sort of dissemination of the law in this particular case. If you've got communities that exist across borders, across other sides of the world, if abuse takes place in a particular country and you emigrate here or you were traveling over there at the time, how the law might treat it here and how it might treat it there. Many faiths, of course, have their central figures who are very, very active here and have a real strong role in certain communities here, but they are kind of sequestered away in places where they're kind of protected from the legal ramifications of how we want to apply the law in this country.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's difficult. To me as well, I feel like the law is the most obvious structure of society's judgment. It should show what we culturally think about a place, what we think about someone. The judgment of the law, I think, is the most obvious way of saying, we believe this is wrong and this is why. And if you're not protected by the law, then you lose that access to authority, you lose that vertical access. And when we're talking about some of these power structures that can play in communities about authority and about being believed, if the law is not on your side, who is? I think that's really, really difficult.
Yeah, definitely.
When we're looking as well, of course, at these barriers from an outside perspective, it's easy to fall into this kind of otherness, this, oh, look at this community, or draw a line and a barrier. I think as well, it would be a complete misunderstanding to try and apply, British cultural values with a broad brush and ignore the strengths of what makes a community special, what actually ties people together, what people's lives really are like. Certainly when we look at these challenges, do you think there's a chance here to look at the particular strengths of the community, look at what they actually value, and rather than say, oh, move in a different direction, no, completely wrong on this, look at things we talked about, like the, masculinity and positive role models and family leadership. Is there an avenue in there that could be the way forward to helping others break their silence, reframing some of these ideas?
Definitely, I think talking about things that you've been through and challenges in your life is a huge strength. I think it takes a very strong individual to do that, no matter how you identify or how you feel within that. I think there's not enough emphasis on how strong you are as a survivor.
Yeah, so perception is, strength is staying quiet, holding on to things, not showing your emotions and whatever. But as Nisa was saying, touching on, to be able to express yourself, I think that shows real courage and strength. And there are people within our communities who are taking that positive step, who are out there, but we need more of them. We need to be more visible. Not only do we need to have positive role models within the community who are talking about mental health, but equally we as therapists, we need to be visible.
Yeah.
So there's that relatability, I can talk to X, Y, and Z because they look like me.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. And that's why our website has photographs of everyone who works here. So you can look through, and even if it's a superficial idea, just seeing someone in that space and knowing, maybe some part of them can identify with what I've gone through, it breaks down one of those other barriers. I think there's room there as well when you talk about visibility, when you're looking at what people outside of the community can do, and about access and about a spotlight on it. We talk a lot here, particularly in this space and outside of it, because we're so damn proud of it. Things like Baby Reindeer. Baby Reindeer tells a man's story from one particular community, one particular background. He looks the way he does. What is going to be the breakthrough moment? How do we get that lens into survivorship within the community that comes from media? Because we've seen just how important it is. Interviews, stories, it could be just a line on a soap opera, whatever it is, finding that way in, having that particular bit of visibility. And of course, visibility of certain communities in all forms of media is something that, Hollywood struggles with, certainly. So then trying to get that lens on a particular issue and cross the even further threshold, talking about male survivorship within a piece of media, it feels like that could potentially be the next frontier. Maybe that's the next challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, mentioning media is so powerful.
Yeah.
I think even settings like this, having conversations with people like myself and Riz, is breaking the stigma. It's opening up the conversation. Even if people aren't ready to act on it, it plants a certain seed in their mind to kind of think people are talking about this. Yeah. So we're opening up that discussion, which I think is a real positive point.
Yeah.
I was just smiling as Nisa was talking. A memory came back to me. No names, so I'm not going to disclose any individual, but I was sat with a group of men, older men, and watching a drama, Pakistani drama. And as the scene was developing, I could see what was happening.
Yeah.
And these men had no idea. Basically, the scene was about a young boy who was being sexually abused by his headmaster. It wasn't as obvious as that, but you could sense that the nuances were there, and it was like so shocking that I'm able to see this. Maybe it's a generational thing, but these older guys had no idea. So then it comes down to educating, getting involved with communities, and you asked earlier about the signs of abuse, etc. We need to get this information out there.
Yeah. No, it's like spotting a bag on public transport. Everyone knows what to do, but seeing the signs of this, that feeling powerless. If you know that there's so many barriers to people being able to talk about it, empowering yourself as an individual, being able to spot it, I think it matters so much. Riz, Nisa, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I could have kept going for another 3 hours. I really hope we have a chance to get you back on the podcast again. I hope you stick around, of course, for the next few segments. We've got the news coming up next. Then we've got some activity spotlights and the letters. Up next is the news segment. Here's where we talk about issues that affect survivors across our community, both within our space and outside of it. Today, I've got an article I really, really want to discuss with my guests. So this article comes from Jacobin, and it's written by Amanda Ong, and it is titled, Britain's Asylum Process Endangers Sexual Violence Survivors. Women reaching Britain as refugees report suffering shocking rates of sexual and gender-based violence, but far from offering them protection, the country's punitive asylum system is treating them as a burden to be cast aside. Survivors of sexual violence are not adequately seen or heard by the state. Indeed, their fear of not being believed is often very legitimate. The article goes on to share various other quotes from women talking about that they are treated as though they are criminals, asked all kinds of questions, and even then, at the end of it, they're not really given any help at all. So obviously it's very painful to see this vary from a female perspective, but of course we work here with male survivors. Are there lessons to be learned generally in terms of the way our migrant and refugee clients are treated in terms of the support they get from our country when they first enter?
I've not had a refugee client myself personally.
Yeah.
I've done checking calls with a client. I think Nisaa may have seen this particular client after me. But barriers again of not having that support network around them, coming into a new country, a new environment, new language, new culture, etc. Just not knowing what's available for not what's available to them. Which organisations they can reach out to, and I think if they approach one organisation, then do these organisations know of any other? It's that link. I think that there's that missing link between the individual organisations.
Yeah, it should be like a spider web.
Yeah.
You should feel like a client is surrounded by support, and that those who are supporting you are actively looking for other ways to, other branches to fill in the things they're looking for. It's very difficult to see, certainly from the community aspect. We get a lot of clients who want to engage, can't physically travel down to the service, don't have any money, worry about language barriers, worry about seeing someone else from their community, all these different sort of anxieties that surround them. And knowing as well that their interactions with law enforcement as well are greatly challenged by this lack of understanding and what feels like a very minimal desire to help people with barriers that are almost insurmountable.
Yeah, definitely. I've worked with a few refugee clients, and one of the things that's very common within their journey is sexual violence is happening to both men and women. And I also think another barrier for men who are refugees and they don't want to report this is because they have a fear of being seen as maybe a terrorist or a groomer themselves, because there's been a lot of talk around South Asian men being thrown into those stereotypes. So
the media loves it, don't they?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and if you have a beard, it automatically puts you into that category of maybe you have some extreme views. So they avoid law enforcement. They avoid speaking to the police and getting the support. For a lot of those reasons as well, which is really sad to see.
Yeah. No, if we're looking already at a situation as a male survivor where you are naturally going to self-isolate your own journey through survivorship, knowing that if you try and reach out, that there's a real chance that the first person you might speak to, the first person you talk to when you're entering the country, the first police officer you might speak to, might completely swat you away. How much of a setback could that be? You know, are there lessons we can learn from the experiences of some of the most vulnerable people coming to the country, some of the people most deserving of help? What does it say about a nation that doesn't extend a hand to the most vulnerable people within it? I think it's very difficult.
I think what doesn't help is the current rhetoric around asylum seekers. People coming in, I think politicians need to be responsible with the language they do use.
Yeah, no. From a simple perspective, because I could mince words about this for a very long period of time, believe me, it should be a privilege that someone is willing to risk their lives to come to this country. Mm-hmm. It shows what they believe it represents. And for them to arrive and immediately be told that it's all a lie and that we look at them with such disdain and such inhumane treatment, I think is thoroughly embarrassing.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I totally agree with you, George.
And remember, of course, as always, all of our news articles and the sources that we reference will be reflected in the episode's description. I thoroughly encourage you to go and have a look for yourself. Now we're going to move on to the activity spotlight. Here is where we talk about the amazing initiatives that we offer here at We Are Survivors, both within our walls and outside of it. Often, we're talking about me and my amazing work in the community. Not today. Riz and Nisaa, you've actually been involved in a program recently to help improve the experiences and listen to the experiences of members outside of the South Asian community, but also in the Black and Middle Eastern and Asian communities as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, actually, it started with me during COVID, during lockdown in 2021. I was approached by the Greater Manchester DME Network, and they had some funding available to offer counselling sessions for people from the Black and Asian community. So it was free at source, and the funding was government funded. It was a trial for 6 months, which lasted about 2.5 years, I think.
Wow.
And I was part of that process of offering counselling sessions to people from within the community. My role was specifically South Asian people. And ironically, most of my clients were men. So I think if you provide a safe space, then men will come and talk because they want to talk.
Yeah.
Moving on from that, just recently, as a follow-on from that project, we were approached by the network again, both myself and Nisaa, to look at doing some interviews with service users, and also doing a report and reporting that back to the network.
Yeah, and we found it was really interesting actually. We found a lot of, kind of difficulties and barriers that people were facing, lack of education, lack of training, everything that we've discussed in the podcast today is really obvious within support services that people are trying to access from these communities. And again, not just South Asian, it was all backgrounds from, global majority backgrounds. So it was a really interesting piece of work that we did, and I think we hope it will just create a bit of change, a change in the culture, a bit more culture around obviously mental health support and how people access that and bring the awareness that it needs.
Well, it's fantastic work. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
And remember, of course, if yourself or someone that you know, a survivor in your life, wants to get involved in our community, the best place to look, of course, is our website. Have a gander, see what we offer, or call in, ask to speak to a member of the community development team. We'll walk you through, hold your hand, and you can learn all about the kind of support we offer, both within and without this space. Finally and tragically, let's move on to the letter segment. This is your chance to write in, have your story told, share any questions with our expert guests and me, who's also here. But today, actually, we've got a question that we hear quite often. This came in from an anonymous caller, and it focused on specifically the barriers of language and being able to access the service. Now, this particular caller wanted to know what services we might have had available for someone who struggled with English, didn't have much confidence around it, but wanted to find a space where they could talk the first time. So you're able to give me a bit of information about how would you help them out?
Well, I think one thing that in our service that we could offer is we do have a really great translation service, where we were able to provide you with a more trauma-informed approach as well with the translation service, so that meaning clients that come in, they will see the same translator every time they have a session. Whereas I know a lot of other organisations that provide translation, it's kind of just who's available at what time.
Yeah.
Whereas we really recognise the consistency, building that relationship, building the trust. When you're working with a translator, they're doing most of the work.
Yeah.
You're pretty much in the middle, sending the messages across. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between you and the client, and the translator is actually working really hard. And then we realised, you wouldn't get a different dog trainer.
Yeah.
Every session.
New therapist every week.
A new therapist every week. So why do we have this for translation services? And that's something that we here at We Are Survivors is really proud of. So now we're able to work with clients who speak all different languages, and we provide a really, really well thought out approach to that as well.
Yeah, I love that as well. So much of language and communication is not just the words you're saying, but like tone and meaning. And if you've never met someone before, you're not going to quite understand their mannerisms. Working with the same translator, not only if you're in a therapy space, for example, you're not going to open the door and tell a new person every single week, here's everything bad that's ever happened to me. You've got someone who's learnt you, understood you, you've worked together, and you've been able to communicate your message. I think that's really, really important. I think it builds trust, and it shows the kind of value and thought that comes into creating a trauma space. Most places don't really appreciate little details like that, but listening and learning, it shows a spotlight on that kind of thought that goes into really, really ensuring that a very major barrier such as language can be removed.
Absolutely. And also maybe the kind of stigma around talking to somebody from a similar background. There's always that worry of they might not agree with what I'm bringing to the sessions. There might not be comfort around beliefs that they might hold. So all of the translators are kind of trained and then worked with to kind of just have that competence really to sort of say, people are going to bring stuff that maybe you've not heard before, or you might struggle listening to, and they're worked with in their own organisation. They're debriefed, they're trained, so it's a really good service, and I'm really proud of it. Yeah,
there's so much to be said there about the after session care for the translator, knowing that we've got that in place as well, but also that you've got someone in that space who is non-judgmental as well, without fear or favour, is not going to sway those words and not feel uncomfortable to say what you're trying to say. I think that's really, really important.
Definitely, so important.
Remember as well, if you want to get your voice heard on the podcast and send us a letter, your story, any questions you might have for us, the best way to do that is by the hashtag #BreakTheSilence on Instagram or Twitter. You can find us there as well at This Is Survivors. Alternatively, you're always welcome to email in via community@wearesurvivors.org.uk. Any information about how to contact us will also be in this episode's description. Well, all good things come to an end, and unfortunately, we are drawing dangerously close to the end of this week's episode of Beyond the Silence. Riz and Nisaa, I want to thank you again so much for your time today. Thank you so much for answering all my prodding questions and sticking through with me till the very end. If you had one final message to any survivors listening right now, what would it be?
I think my message to any survivor would be, I know it's difficult to reach out, and I know there's probably thoughts in your mind, a lot of doubts are in your mind, but we're here as a safe space to support you, and we'll do that at your pace. There's not going to be a team of people here forcing you to talk about things. We're going to talk about things when you're ready to talk about things, but just give us a call, come and visit us, do the drop-in, and see what we're like, and we hope to support you, and we're here when you need us.
Yeah, there's no rush.
There's no rush.
What about yourself, Riz?
I'd like to say fear, I understand. Fear is a big barrier, and just want survivors out there to know that you're not alone. Some of our staff members are also survivors here, so we understand what it's like to be in those situations, and like Nisaa said, we're here to provide a safe space and build a trusting relationship with you and you with us, so you feel comfortable sharing at your own pace. And there's no set agenda. It's whatever you want to bring at your pace, and we're happy to work with you.
Yeah, to know that when you walk in here, that the people you're working with, the people that are listening to you, are either survivors themselves or allies of the community, people who may have survivors in their own lives, have experienced and have knowledge of this and want to listen, are trained to listen, to hear you, and just let you talk about the pace you want to. I think it's really, really special. Thank you so much for joining us today on Beyond the Silence. I've been your host, George. We do hope you join us again very, very soon. But for now, from our safe space to yours, goodbye.